Season 2, Episode 2 of House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra the Cruel, was another amazing episode. But first, and I will talk about that episode, but first I want to talk about Episode 1 again, because I got so many comments, so many questions, so many people talking and asking about this. So I want to address it before I talk about Episode 2, because it's also a big part of Episode 2. Blood and cheese. For the uninitiated, the people who have not read the book, blood and cheese refers to the two assassins that in episode 1 killed Helena's son. So in the book, this happened slightly differently, and a lot of book readers were fuming that the show hadn't done it exactly like they did in the book. So there's two things I want to say about that specifically and about what I'm doing when I'm reviewing season 2. In season 1, I talked more about book versus show. In season 2, I don't really plan to do that except for when it really, I don't know, comes up or I feel called to. At the end of the season, I'll probably do a wrap-up kind of talking about a big overview of how it diverged from the book and some key big differences. But I really don't think it's terribly productive to talk about book differences with every episode in season 2, because the show needs to be able to stand for itself, first of all. It needs to make sense in and of itself for itself. Second of all, with season 1, the show already diverged from the book fairly substantially. Not to the point where it's no longer anything like the book, but there are some very specific things that it chose to do with characters that are either new or different from what happens in the book. And in order to kind of do justice to the plot lines that it has created in the show, it needs to diverge from the book in order to let those flourish and let those really shine in the narrative that it has in the show. I mean, Viserys, King Viserys, who's not in season 2, R.I.P., he's an extremely different type of character than he is in the book. And he is the linchpin for a lot of what's going on, the catalyst for what's going on. So that already changes the tone of the entire story. And there's a lot of little things that, again, you can watch all the videos from season 1 if you want to hear more differences. Anyway, so that's why I don't particularly want to talk about book differences in season 2, every single episode getting super specific, again, unless something is whoa, this totally breaks lore, or this is so different from the book that I do not know where they're going with this, sure, I'll bring it up. But blood and cheese, more or less happened the way that it did in the book, and then they did change it in ways that I think strengthen it for the show's narrative, because the show's narrative is different from the book's narrative. And so I think the way they chose to do it was the exact right thing to do. So in the book, it's just slightly more horrific what happens. So they still go in there, they still go in to kill Helena's son, but they're told that Helena brings her children to see Alicent every night. So they tie up Alicent and then wait for Helena to bring her children there. And then she has 2 sons there, and they make Helena choose which son they're gonna kill. And then she chooses one of them and they kill the other one while telling the one that she chose that he's the one that she had chosen for death. And this completely messes her up, and it's obviously horrific. A child dies and Alicent is there, and it's really horrific. What happened in the show, also horrific. And in the show, Helena is not nearly as significant a character as Alicent or Criston Cole. And Alicent and Criston Cole have this romance that's going on, or this, I don't know if romance is exactly the right word, but they, they're involved. And that, the whole plotline, how that came to be, the baggage that comes with that is a thing that isn't really present in the book. And so by doing it in the way that they did it here, yes, we could have had the more horrific Sophie's choice of choose which child dies and then live with the grief of having told one of them that you're going to kill him. But what does that do moving forward narratively for House of the Dragon, other than just be worse and be sadder? But does that create narrative tension? Does that sow the seeds for further tensions between the characters? No, not really. So what they did in the show instead was that they had Criston not be on duty, because instead he's sleeping with Alicent. And so when she comes in and is they've killed my son, now Criston and Alicent have been discovered. So that's information that Helena has that she could use against them or reveal. And 2, they both now feel guilty because they are arguably, at least in some way, possibly responsible for this happening. It's not a certainty that Criston could have prevented this if he had been on duty, but the fact that maybe he could have is something that they'll all live with now. And that is so much more potent source of drama and tension for the characters in the show than doing it exactly the way they did it in the book would have been. And so I think it's exactly the right choice. Okay, they could have brought in another kid and had her choose between them just to have that, but that's not really a big focus of the story. Not Helena, not the kids. It's the fact that a child died, that it was witnessed by the mother, and the whole assassination. Like, that's what's important about this. And again, the way they did it creates tension now between Helena and Alicent, because Helena knows her mother's sleeping with Kristen. Alicent is worried that Helena might betray that secret and also feels guilty because, again, she took Kristen away from his duty. Kristen might have saved the child. We'll never know. Like, it's so much more fraught now. So there's so much more they can do with that. So yeah, I'm not really going to talk about the books unless it comes up like this, unless like I really, really am like dying to talk about the difference. I'm gonna focus on the show because the show's narrative has to be consistent for itself. And this is one of the big things that I think happened to Game of Thrones, like why it went wrong. I don't know for a fact that this is why, but I don't doubt that they were told by George R. R. Martin, or that they guessed it or whatever, that there was good reason to believe that the ending that we got in Game of Thrones, the show, is the true ending that George R. R. Martin had in mind, but only in its like facts and not in the journey and how you get there. And the show had already done so much to change the characters and narratives of Game of Thrones that by the time we got to that point, to shove them into the places that the book is going to have them be in, it doesn't fit them, and it's certainly not in the time that you gave it to get there. So if House of the Dragon was to be like, well, I know we've gone different ways with these characters than they are in the book, but we got to shove them into the places that they are in the book because that's accurate, even though it doesn't feel accurate for the narrative that it's been telling, that's a bad way to write a show, in my opinion. Okay, so that's enough about that. Let's talk about episode 2. So with season 1, I did this, and I kind of want to do this again now with season 2. Instead of talking chronologically, I kind of want to break it up into like themes or topics or whatever. So that's what I've done with episode 2. And the first theme or topic I want to talk about is grief. How the show has depicted grief and how it depicts characters' responses to grief. So between episodes 1 and 2 now, I feel like as a complete set, because we got Rhaenyra's son dying and now Alicent's grandson dying. So now we've seen the total package of both sides experiencing the similar type of loss and how they respond to it. I think it's very interesting to look at how each of the characters has responded to this and where they differ and where they parallel. So in episode 1, we saw Rhaenyra's response to grief. She's measured, it's a slow burn. She's bloodthirsty ultimately, but in a more calculated and patient way. Daemon is just immediate, thoughtless retribution. The swifter and the bloodier, the better. Now in episode 2, we see Alicent, who's feeling remorseful, but more importantly, guilty, because she feels responsible, not just because she's literally in the moment may have taken Kristen away from his duty in a key moment, though that is certainly a part of it, but there's this sense of her overall piety, or her overall religiousness is making her feel like this is not just an indictment of her act that one night, it's an indictment of her sinning by sleeping with Kristen in the first place. You know, this is a judgment from the universe, from God, from the fate, whatever, that she's being punished personally. So this attitude, it is both selfless and selfish, because it's like, this is all about me, as opposed to, you know, bad things happen, and bad things happen to you and around you and to people that you love. But the idea that the universe specifically punished you by killing an innocent kid that was your grandkid, therefore hurting your daughter as well, like, it's a pretty self-centered attitude, but like, she's been quite sort of like religiously guilt-ridden for all of the show, basically, which is, again, a thing that is not really present in the book, not in the way that it is in the show. Then we have Otto Hightower, who regards it as opportunity, and then is like, oh yeah, I mean, obviously, like, I'm grieving, but like, mainly this is an opportunity that should not be squandered, because he is our Littlefinger. Chaos is a ladder. And then we have Aegon, who, immediate, thoughtless retribution. The swifter and the bloodier, the better. That sounds familiar. So the next theme I want to talk about is motherhood, which is kind of tied in with that. And so there's, this isn't like a big section. There's only 2 scenes that I feel like I want to talk about because of how they are juxtaposed. So in episode 1, when Jacaerys is crying because Luke is dead and he's trying to report to his mother, I talked about this in my video on episode 1, and he breaks down crying, Rhaenyra, you know, gathers him close and holds him and comforts him because they're grieving together, and she, you know, doesn't tell him to man up or anything. She lets him cry and she grieves with him. And in episode 2, Alicent has just finished talking to her father about how you need to manipulate, control, and put a leash on Aegon. And then she finds Aegon weeping, sobbing, and she walks away. She doesn't engage. She doesn't try to comfort him or soothe him. She's like, no, nope, and walks away. Just again, the way that they are depicted as mothers is like polar opposite, while still being utterly devoted to their children, but just in the complete opposite way. Next, I want to talk about Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship, which certainly is put to the test in this episode. So Alicent isn't really the only one who has an Aegon to deal with. Rhaenyra's is worse because he is more capable and more experienced. That also makes him better, being capable and experienced. So the way that they both talk about Viserys when they have this scene where she's confronting him about this child murder that Daemon doesn't seem all that broken up about. It is very illuminating how they talk about him. Because, I mean, to Rhaenyra, Viserys was her father, and he was, while a flawed person that she often disagreed with, she still revered him and still thought of him as wise. And to Daemon, he was always just weak. And so the way that they both, the lens through which they view Viserys' decisions and actions in life is through they're ascribing very different motivations to his behaviors. Where Rhaenyra sees patience and good judgment, Daemon is only capable of understanding it through the lens of it being weak or strong, and if it's not strong, then it's weak. Neither Daemon nor Aegon are capable of understanding patience, restraint, the long view. While Daemon did not intend to kill Helena's child, he isn't very remorseful about the fact that her child is dead. Aegon similarly, he wants to kill the man that killed his child, and doesn't bother him that he'd have to kill all the other rat catchers to do it. Doesn't care at all. Otto is angry with Aegon for the same reason that Rhaenyra is angry with Daemon, because of their thoughtlessness, because of just how quick to vengeance they are. Whatever the cost, it doesn't matter. Again, neither Aegon nor Daemon can understand where Otto and Rhaenyra are coming from. In the case of Rhaenyra and Daemon, Rhaenyra is the one with the crown, so Daemon has to walk away. In the case of Aegon and Otto, Aegon's the one with the crown, so Otto has to walk away. Which, when we look at where our parties are left, the one who holds the crown on Rhaenyra's side is the more considered and wise one, whereas the one holding the crown on Team Black is Aegon. Editing me here, I realized while I was editing the video that I had forgotten to mention something that I wanted specifically to call out, which is how in season 1, Rhaenyra, it seemed to be a lot about how she's not like Viserys and how much she is like Daemon. That I talked about that in videos about season 1. And here in episode 2 in particular of season 2, it seems to be defined by how not like Daemon Rhaenyra is. And I just think that's an interesting kind of transition, because in a lot of ways, Rhaenyra has always been and seems to continue to be kind of the best parts of both Viserys and Daemon, because she's certainly more aggressive, more bold, more decisive than Viserys. So as compared to Viserys, Rhaenyra is very Daemon-like. But as compared to Daemon, she is measured and patient, has the long view. So as compared to Daemon, she's much more Viserys-like, and she's kind of that perfect middle ground between the two of them. Well, I shouldn't say perfect. She's certainly flawed, but I feel it's all relative, right? So relative to Viserys, she's Daemon. Relative to Daemon, she's Viserys. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say and didn't say, and back to whatever I did actually say. I briefly wanted to talk about Mysaria, because, again, this is a great opportunity to see Rhaenyra's character, how it's different from Daemon, how it's different from Alicent, how it's different from Otto Hightower. Rhaenyra could be very cruel to Mysaria, but instead she decides to honor Daemon's word, even though she doesn't actually know that Daemon gave his word at all, because Mysaria could easily have lied about that. But Rhaenyra would prefer to be honorable, especially in light of what Daemon's just done, probably. But it's also an opportunity for Rhaenyra to kind of see what life is like for a woman in this world. The way that, she has seen sexism, certainly, the way that she and Rhaenys have been treated. The idea that she can't be the heir to the throne because she's a woman. It's not like she's never experienced sexism, but the realization that her experience with sexism is still an extremely privileged version of it as compared to someone like Mysaria. And hearing how Daemon treated Mysaria from Mysaria's own lips, it is even further reason for Rhaenyra to doubt and to feel some kind of way about Daemon. So I really loved that moment between them. It wasn't girl talk, heart to heart, we gotta stick together. They still can't really trust each other. They don't have very much in common, but they can both kind of appreciate the other and respect each other in a limited sense. And again, it's an illuminating moment for Rhaenyra. And then it seemed like the show implied, it's not confirmed, but it seemed to imply that Rhaenyra's, good deed of letting Mysaria go is repaid in kind when Mysaria, she certainly does see Eric arriving to come and kill Rhaenyra. It's not clear if she alerted anyone to this, but they made a point of showing her noticing it, and she had just been done a good turn by Rhaenyra. So I don't know if the show ever will confirm or deny that, but it seemed to me that she might have, like, alerted someone to this going on. Next, I want to talk about Kristen and Alicent, the opposite of David and Rhaenyra in so many ways. They both keenly feel the guilt of what they have been doing and are still doing. The guilt is like quasi-religious for both of them. Alicent's is more like actually religious, as I just talked about. And for Kristen, it's this betrayal of his vows for the Knight's Guard, for the purity of being a white cloak. I'm sorry, a King's Guard, not Knight's Guard. Guarding themselves. Alicent responds to this tragedy of the child dying by blaming herself. This is just punishment. This is retribution for her personally. It's her fault, and I mean, again, in the way the show did this, as opposed to how the book did it, it is a little bit actually her fault. Kristen, on the other hand, instead of internalizing it and being like, I deserve this is judgment, like, oh, woe is me, he's the opposite. He lashes out, wants to throw the blame elsewhere, can't handle the guilt of it, has to take swift action just to, like, balance the scales. If he can lash out at Rhaenyra, then, he's, like, made up for it. So now it's even again. So that's why he sends out Arik, which, again, this is why the change in Blood and Cheese is so good, because it is Kristen Cole that sends Arik to go and assassinate or attempt to assassinate Rhaenyra in the book. But there isn't, like, he was sleeping with the queen when this happened and wasn't there and has, like, this personal reason to be like, go do this reckless things to assuage my guilt. So it just adds so much more nuance to Kristen's choice to send Arik to do that, which is, again, why I think the show did the exact right thing with Blood and Cheese. And then Eric and Arik. I think, like, this is a perfect distillation, microcosm of civil war, which, like, we haven't actually started the civil war yet. I mean, we are, like, at the precipice, like, one toe in. Because, we've had casualties on both sides, but it's not war yet. Everyone's, like, preparing for war. Everyone's gathering troops and allies and resources and making plans for it. But outright actual civil war has not broken out yet. And I feel like this herald of civil war being two twin brothers fighting and killing each other over this, one, again, is a perfect distillation of civil war, brother against brother. But also, I think, is a fantastic example of how this show and how George R. R. Martin in general in his books, in Fire and Blood and in the main series, The Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones for the most part did this very well, House of the Dragon has done this well consistently, is showcasing how the decisions of the mighty, they mostly hurt the weak and the small and the poor. And I think the show and the books do a very good job of not just, I feel like oftentimes that conversation is like, oh, kings and queens make decisions and then the peasants die. Which, like, obviously that's true. And, like, yes. But there's so many levels in between. Like, Kristen has more agency than most people in Westeros. He has more actual power. Arik and Eric have more actual power than your, average, like, fishmonger's wife. But they are not kings and queens. And so they, too, are fighting and dying and losing and suffering because of decisions that they are, like, once removed from, twice removed from. They are very near to the seat of power, but they then also are the first to die before, the fisherman's wife. And again, I feel like the books and the show, both shows, do a good job of, again, not just making the point that, oh, look how tragic and sad, when kings and queens, they fight, it's the peasants that die, and, like, that's, like, morally bad and sad, because it is morally bad and sad, don't get me wrong. But it's not just morally bad and sad. To be purely, like, pragmatic and practical, the way that Otto Hightower or Peter Baelish would be, it's also just a good idea to have the common man on your side. Being popular with the little people isn't just for vanity. Like, that does put you in a stronger position as a leader. That's why, like, the conversations between Otto and Aegon, bring this to the forefront, as many scenes in the books and the shows have done, where they're saying, hey, look, it's not just about, like, the fact that it's a bad look, or like, oh, it's wrong to kill innocent people, because, it is wrong to kill innocent people, but he's like, do you understand how much you will have pissed off everybody? Like, they were on our side. They were gonna be willing to fight and die for us. We wouldn't even need to ask. And now they hate you for what you just did. And that is bad for us, like, practically speaking. And then the fact that the show ends, or this episode ends, with, again, Eric and Arik dying over this. This is civil war, brother against brother. This is what it's come to. But then the people that caused it, the kings and queens, the people with the power, Alicent and Kristen Cole, have they learned their lesson from this tragedy that they were so overcome with guilt over? No, they did not. They went right back to it. Yeah, I thought episode 2 was fantastic. I frankly was astounded that it was over. I was ready for another hour, which, you know, is the mark of a good show. But let me know how you found it. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me. I am correct about blood and cheese, but feel free to tell me your wrong opinion about it. And I'll see you for episode 3.